All right, so good morning, everyone. Welcome at day two of the online edition of the Growth Strategy Tour, which is part of the Master of Innovation Entrepreneurship at Antwerp Management School. And this year's topic is Accelerating Business in Uncertain Times, the New York versus the Tel Aviv perspective. So we had interesting sessions yesterday in Tel Aviv and in New York. Today we're virtually in Tel Aviv. And we're very happy to have Hilla Ovi Brenner with us because she's the managing director of the TechStars accelerator in Tel Aviv. And I don't know how you say that online, but the floor is yours, Hilla.
That's great. And I'm really, really happy to be here. I know it's very different to do this online, and there is less that I can show you of Tel Aviv aside the beautiful photos. But I think there's a lot I can say about Tel Aviv, which is why Tel Aviv or why Israel is a startup nation. So first of all, welcome to our city virtually, the beautiful Tel Aviv. My name is Hilla Ovi Brenner, and thank you for introducing me. I am the managing director at TechStars Tel Aviv for the last 2 years. I want to talk to you about what I've done previously because I was previously a serial entrepreneur. And so I love spending time with people that have a passion for this industry and for entrepreneurship in general. Previous to being an entrepreneur, I was a lawyer, a very bored one, and was both a lawyer here in Tel Aviv and in New York. So I have a place of comparison. My first company was called White Smoke. It's public today. I raised money over $40 million from investors both in Tel Aviv and in New York. So I know both ecosystems pretty well. Then I had another company which was in the media industry, and hopefully I can answer some of your questions a little bit later. And then started investing as an angel investor before I was approached by TechStars, and ultimately led me to do the most meaningful thing that I've ever done in my life is actually run the TechStars Tel Aviv branch. So in today's session, we're going to explore a little bit about TechStars, of course, and a little bit of the ecosystem. I'll be speaking for about 15 minutes and then happy to take your questions. All right, does that sound like a deal? Great. So TechStars is a global platform. Some of you might know it. We are operating in 47 accelerator locations. And we have activities in over 146. So activities like Startup Weekends, Second Thursdays, community events. And this makes us the most active system for accelerating startups and entrepreneurs around the world. And this is why we call ourselves the worldwide network that helps entrepreneurs succeed. We've had 220 accelerator classes to date. We have over 5,400 founders in the TechStars network, and a little bit by numbers, we're the most active investors because we invest in typically about 2 startups a day. We have over 100 corporate partners, and our portfolio market cap valuation is $27 billion. And this again makes us the #1 investor by volume per Crunchbase. In Tel Aviv, we had a very successful fintech program with Barclays Bank, and we are now launching on the 7th of June the first Tel Aviv generic city program that is taking all different verticals. At TechStars, we have 47 accelerator programs globally. Some of our very prominent participants, you can see there are companies like SendGrid, Data, Stanley, etc. And some of our very prominent partners are Barclays, Alexa, Bosch, Ford, etc. So back to Israel, my hometown. What makes it so very unique and why we decided to do a city accelerator here in Startup Nation. There is something about the vibe here that really attracts multinationals. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this ecosystem, which is really very magical. So the startup ecosystem is very vibrant. We have the most startups per capita. I think there's 6,600 active companies in Israel. We have 225 hubs, including accelerators here in Israel. What makes us TechStars unique is that there are not many global players like TechStars here. We have 430 VCs and angels around here. And I think what is really differentiates us from other ecosystems is that because so much innovation has happened here and was created here, a lot of people come here to actually understand how this works, to recruit, to buy companies, to learn from companies. And so we have over 320 multinationals that come here and create their own innovation hubs or accelerators or R&Ds around here. All right, a little bit by numbers. So 2019, before this Corona COVID-19 crisis happened, was one of the best years for the Israeli tech. Companies raised $8.3 billion. We had 522 deals. $148 million was raised by pre-Series A financing rounds, and altogether was a very substantial year for the Israeli tech. The key trends that we thought we were seeing were AI-based and data-related. And we had 41 mega funding rounds, more than $50 million. So 2019 seemed, I think, one of the top climax years for the Israeli tech. Unfortunately, COVID-19 came into existence, and now I think the key trends for 2020 are changing a little bit. However, I have to say, although I'm not very objective, I think the innovation in Israel is so strong that possibly COVID-19 will be a substantial hurdle, but I think will not destroy the innovation here. Here are some deals over 100 millions that we saw here in 2019. You might recognize some of these companies, some of our best friends with very extensive understanding of how things happen. And I think this is a slide that really can show you how diversified the market is, and how we're not just good at one thing, we're really good at so many different things, including insurtech and fintech and edtech and healthcare and biomed, etc. So I'm highlighting here some of the Israeli unicorns. On a personal note, I have to say some of these are very exciting to Israel because no one ever thought they could emerge in such a small country. You know, previously for a very long time, people said the Israeli ecosystem was good at bringing new technologies that would be acquired by multinationals. But we're lucky to show these unicorns off and can show how Israeli companies can actually create big companies, substantial, employ a lot of employees. And so companies like WalkMe, like Get, like Tabula and Outbrain that have merged with each other really show us that we are good at doing both. So like I promised, I would keep this very short. On a personal note, I have to say the Israeli ecosystem, Startup Nation, is one of the most exciting ecosystems. This is why people come from all over the world to learn. And I'm happy to answer any questions about it. I'm very familiar with it. I grew up as an entrepreneur here, and I'm happy to take any of your questions. This, by the way, are my details here, Hilla Brenner, and also the program manager. And very, very happy, regardless of this call, to connect with you on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on email, and be in touch with you, because I really try to leverage our companies and give them as much exposure as possible.
Thank you very much, Hilla, for the interesting presentation. I have many questions, actually, but I'm going to leave the floor first to our students to ask any questions. Same system as yesterday. You can put them in the public chat, or you can speak up and unmute your microphone, and then I will say your name. But I see already 2 questions in the public chat. So Vincent has a question. Do you think funds will be more conservative after Corona, meaning the amount of available funds will maybe decrease, leading to some startups that will have difficulty in receiving funding?
It's an excellent question. I think time will tell. I have a feeling that things will slow down in terms of investments. Yesterday, we had a really interesting session with 3 investors from the European area. And it feels like most of the people together are running about $400 million. And I think it's not only my understanding, but investors' understanding that investors will first focus on saving their own portfolio before they will invest with new investments. So this could slow down a little bit. However, so many new different verticals open up during COVID. I think this could really change things. So I think time will tell.
We have another question from Jonathan. Is it possible for a Belgian student to join TechStars in Israel with a startup idea? You have to know that our students are already working for several months on their startup idea, and every year we have different startups coming out of our program. And Jonathan has a question: is it possible for a Belgian student to join TechStars in Israel with a startup idea?
Of course. So TechStars is a worldwide network, and we have no barriers. So we have accelerators everywhere, in Europe, in Israel, in Dubai. Some of them are very vertical based. So we would have, like, for instance, smart kitchens with Bosch in Munich. Some of them are fintech related, but we accept all different nationalities. In my last class, for instance, we only had 4 Israeli companies. Most of them were from around the world. So we had an Italian company, we had one from Montenegro, and I have not had a Belgian company yet, so I would love to invest in one. Looking forward to your application.
Yeah, maybe it's time to make a change in that then.
Yes.
Hilla, you said that your home is Tel Aviv, and that you also spend quite some time in the New York ecosystem. Sana has a question: what would you think is the biggest difference between Israel and the US in terms of entrepreneurial mindset, or maybe in terms of other stuff?
Wow, I have so many thoughts on this. I don't know if we have the time for this. I think that there is something about the Israeli spirit that's very different. And we're so used to surviving. This is a very young country. And so in 72 years, with hardly no natural resource, we needed to excel. And I think the New York ecosystem, in the US ecosystem in general, is a very exciting one. But entrepreneurs are very different. It's, the game is all about people at the end. So I think there is a very big difference between the Israeli entrepreneurs and the US in terms of bandwidth and resilience. I think Israelis are more close to the European mindset than they are to the US one. In terms of everything. So if anything, I think there is a big difference in resilience, in some of the ambitions, some of the creativity. There's a big difference.
Okay, I see also some questions regarding applying for TechStars, which is not a surprise, of course. When somebody presents their ID, how does the progress looks like? It's a question from Marie. Applying online, question mark. What are the criteria which make an ID a good ID for you?
Okay, so TechStars, and this is what makes TechStars such a great network, is that we actually have a very long process. We say it's easier to get into Harvard today than it is to get into TechStars, because the process is super long. However, when you get into TechStars, you get all the connections. And the way it works, you apply online to one of the programs. You can even apply to a few of the programs. We have a very long selection process where we actually understand, and we do diligence, and we meet the team, and we interview you. It's quite a long process, but at the end of it, you actually start the program, which gives you a lot of benefits. So what we look for in entrepreneurs, we always say team, team, team. I know it sounds like a cliche, but we first look at the entrepreneurs themselves. Who are they? Why are they passionate about what they're doing? Can they really make a difference? Can they execute? Can they go through the roller coaster of being a startup entrepreneurs? And only then do we look at the market opportunity, the business model, everything else that investors look at. So we first look at team. It's important that you have a balanced team. We don't only look for ideas. I have to say something that's not popular is like ideas are not as important to us, because I think ideas change. And I think people don't reinvent the wheel anymore so much like they used to. I think it's about who it is that executes. How well do they understand the market and the competition? You know, my first company was called White Smoke. It was a grammar check. And my passion was about writing and helping non-native speakers understand. And I think today, if I look at it, I think it was a really good company, and it did really well. It was traded at over $100 million. And I raised a lot of money for it. It was on 100 million computers. But if I didn't know how to be resilient enough, I was thrown out of like every VC that I know. And people said things like, you know, it's a feature in Word. It's never gonna happen. A computer is never gonna understand text. It was a long time ago, but I really feel that when I judge ideas, it's not really about the ideas. It's about how you understand the market and how you can execute on these.
Okay, very valuable input, I would say. A follow-up question from Marie is, what is the average time of a process to accept a startup? How many weeks, months can you?
Yes, so the process is usually about 3 months, 2 to 3 months. And really goes by quite quickly, because you meet a lot of people from all around the world. And that's kind of usually the process. The program itself is 3 months. Usually it's a physical program. You know, I think things will change now. Most of the programs have now gone virtual, so things are different. But look, there's good and bad in virtual. I think the positive aspect is that you meet a lot of people that possibly you couldn't meet before. You get a lot more information. And the bad is that we don't have an interaction. Even now, I would have loved for you to visit, the accelerator, and I could show you around. So there's good and bad in everything.
Okay. You already showed a few interesting startups, scale-ups actually from 2019 and so on. Julie has a question: what are some of the promising startups that you see nowadays in 2020 that you now see emerging that we have to pay attention to? Or
yeah, I'm seeing a lot of really, really interesting things in terms of payments. There's really great companies here that are dealing with banking and fintech, Papaya, and others. Are also seeing a lot of healthcare related startups. So I see a big trend in AI that's not really going down. Even with the COVID, there is a lot of cyber and AI and data going on. So I think the trend continues.
is that something that you see also in the coming 5 years? Do you think that the overall focus will more or less stay on IT and technology in Israel, or do you see other trends emerging?
I think so. I mean, like, I'm not a fortune teller, so I really don't know, and I really hate people who always think that they know what's coming ahead. But I have a feeling that we will see this trend. We're very strong with this. We have top security units in the army that deal with cyber and AI and data related deep tech startups. So I think we're going to see a lot of that.
Okay, it's really in the DNA of Tel Aviv and Israel, I suppose.
It is. It is.
So another thing that we ask ourselves also in New York and in Tel Aviv is that how do corporates and startups try to connect and work together to achieve growth for the startup, but also for the corporates? So you mentioned that global corporates love to locate their innovation hubs in Israel. What do you think is their main strategic incentive to do this? Is it talent, the fact that it is a very complete ecosystem, or what is it that makes the Tel Aviv ecosystem so attractive for these corporates?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I try to touch on that in my presentation. I want to expand on that because I think that's kind of what I'm seeing a lot. And luckily, TechStars has really picked on that, working with corporates. So hopefully we can bring our partners also a lot of Israeli talent through our network. But when they come here, and you can see SAP, Apple's got an R&D center here. Microsoft's got one of the biggest. Amazon, develops nearly their entire Alexa team is here in Israel. And I think they come here for talent, but they also come here for this something about the mentality and the vibe of innovation. I think it's because people are less scared to fail here than they are in the US. So for corporates, it's very attractive, but they see very many startups with very huge ambitions, what we call moonshots. And one of the things I see a lot in corporates when they come here is they have a big dilemma how to actually speak to their startups for a few reasons. One is the Israeli startups are very Israeli in nature, so they have a different, not only a language barrier, but like a culture barrier with Israelis because we see things sometimes in a different way. And the other very big barrier that we see here is that startups always think they can do everything quickly and in a great way because they're optimistic. That's what they should be. They're entrepreneurs. They're optimistic. They think they can do this. So corporates have a different, it's almost like you need to translate between what the startup is saying and what the corporate wants to hear. I'll give you an example from my own history. So when I was running White Smoke, we were a very small company, and my dream was to actually get our grammar software on students' computers in the United States. And I nearly signed an agreement with Pearson Education. Pearson is one of the largest education groups in the States. And during my discussions with them, they kept asking me how ready I was for this. And because I really thought I was ready, we signed an agreement, which, by the way, took about a year. I always tell startups it takes about a year to sign an agreement. From the time we signed the agreement to when this was launched, it took about a year and a half. And the reason I tell the story is because in no way was I lying. I really kept thinking that I was ready to do what Pearson really wanted me to do, and that my engineers were ready to develop at the rate that they wanted to develop. But there was a huge corporate difference, like a gap lost in translation between what I wanted to do and what they wanted me to do. And the reason I say this is because when corporates come here to Israel, there's two major gaps. One is they're talking to Israelis, like a different state of mind and different communication skill. And also there is a barrier between a startup and a corporate. So when multinationals come here, they look for talent, they look for creativity, they look for something about the vibe of this place. But then they also need to understand that there is a huge barrier in translation.
Okay. That's really interesting. And maybe I have a follow-up question on that. Is we see in Western Europe that the mindset of corporates and the view of corporates towards startups changed dramatically. I think in the past they had a feeling that startups not always have enough experience to work with and so on, and now they see that many of them disrupted their markets, so they have a totally different behavior towards those startups. And I wonder, at this point of time, I see some of them experimenting with a lot of different types of activities, ways to connect with these startups. Do you see new practices, or do you see interesting practices that show how startups and corporates connect with each other?
Well, I think one of the reasons I joined TechStars was for this, because I realized that this was the best connection that startups can have with corporates, because it's just too hard to find corporates and find the right person within the corporate. So again, from my own history, when I was looking for corporate partners, it took me forever to find them on LinkedIn, reach out to them, write to them a zillion times, go to conferences and try to speak to them. And all this is an old world, because today there are platforms like TechStars where you enter. So if a company is doing a program in fintech and they're doing a program with me in Barclays, my job is to find the right person within the organization and get them to have a conversation together. So the new practice, the new world doesn't require you anymore to be a stranger. It just requires that you do one of the platforms, or that you find one of the partners that's going to help you. I mean, the idea is not anymore to haunt these people around the world. The idea is actually to meet with them face to face and as early as possible. I can't stress this enough, because the earlier you get there, the more you can design your product to fit their needs. There is a lot of still startups that are developing for a really long time without understanding if the customer actually needs this. And so that's kind of my biggest tip to you, is like, get as much advice and meet corporates as soon as possible. And the practice that you're asking about is just to join forces with platforms, with accelerators, with programs like yourself that are teaching you innovation, and meet as many people and get inspiration from as many people as possible.
Okay, that's clear. Well, the students already did quite some interviews with different stakeholders in the Tel Aviv ecosystem, and one of the returning aspects was the military education that seemed to play a big role also in the startup ecosystem and in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So, question from Vincent is, what does it exactly entail? Is it about norms and values mindset, or do they really teach certain classes and subjects?
So I think, I mean, I'm not saying it's overrated, the military service. I'm not in any way underestimating it. I just think there's a lot more to the ecosystem than just a few top units. If you look at the percentage of startups that came from top units, it's not as big as people believe it is. So I wouldn't take all the Israeli ecosystem's magic and put it into how they all came out of top units in the army and all that. I would look more, I think, at the Israeli vibe or DNA of survival and creativity, and the ability to learn, rather than just put it on military programs.
Okay. We have another question of Katerina. How did TechStars Israel have to adapt to COVID-19, and which of those changes have turned out to be an improvement to how things have been done prior to the lockdown and are therefore likely to be continued?
Wow, that's an excellent question. So I think as we go, we are learning every day. That we are having this interview at home, which would probably never do. And some of our companies are really finding it difficult to raise money at this time. TechStars Tel Aviv has turned nearly like virtual altogether. We are helping our companies in that we're doing a lot of AMA, Ask Me Anything session with top leaders. If you join our community on LinkedIn, on Facebook, you'd be able to share some of this content. We're doing a lot of community events for mentors, investors, and startups. And actually, I think in a way, this has brought us like a new horizon. Sometimes when you're forced into something, it looks like a lot of it is here to stay, especially a lot of the virtual content that's being shared around the world. It's very easy for us now to have a lot of very smart people join us on the same call, get answers. Founders can really, without flying to places. Also, I feel like people have a lot more time on their hands, surprisingly enough. I'm seeing a lot of corporate partners actually engaging more with our startups than they did before, which is amazing to me, because you could have reached out to that executive at Amazon like a zillion times, but now he's home with the kids. I guess the alternative is to be with the kids. So maybe he's out there to work and create and maybe bring interesting solutions. So I think people have more time on their hands, and so TechStars Tel Aviv has become very community-based, very virtual, and reaches out to all the different programs, which makes it's really the power of our network, which is great.
Okay, super. We have a question from Julie, going back to the corporate startup relationship. As an accelerator, you follow a lot of startups and scale-ups, and you also see cases of corporate venturing for some of them. Over the years, did you see a change in the way corporate venturing happens? Different ways of approaching the startups, different ways of including the startups in the story of the bigger corporates? Question of Lawrence, actually.
I'm seeing more flexibility. I think corporates understand that they really need to reach out to startups. Before it was like a little bit of a game, like yeah, what'd you do today? Yeah, I met the startup from Europe, whatever. I mean, it took a really long time for corporates to actually engage with startups and actually think seriously of adapting some of the technologies into this big corporate machine. But now corporates understand they have no choice. They really can't stay behind, because if they don't adapt some of the technologies, another competition will. And so innovation is not anymore just a buzzword like it was a few years back. I think corporates are actually putting together innovation teams because they actually want to incorporate their technologies within their corporates and their technologies. So I think it's more feasible today than it was before.
Okay, super. Hilla, are you ready for a few final questions? Because you handled already quite some questions by now, but they keep on coming. So, Hilla, I also follow you a bit online, and I know that you also are a promoter of women in tech and of female entrepreneurship. So we also have a question on that from Laura. Also, I would like to mention that our program, the Master Innovation Entrepreneurship at Antwerp Management School, we moved more towards a technology entrepreneurship program. And we see that we have this year, it's the first year that we have more female entrepreneurs than male entrepreneurs. So that is an interesting.
Oh, that's great news.
Yeah. So the question of Laura is, how do you see the entrepreneurial environment in Israel for female entrepreneurs, and how was it for you?
Oh gosh, I can talk forever about this. This is important. First of all, I'm very proud of you guys for having more female, or at least even half and half would be amazing. Look, we are 51% of the population in Israel, women, and yet we're less than 5% female CEOs in startups. So the situation is super miserable. And when I was a young entrepreneur, it took me a really, really long time to understand where to place myself in this ecosystem, because there were really 3 generations of women, I think, in the founder world. The first generation were the ones that actually wanted to be exactly like men. So they sometimes dressed up in suits or use the same jokes and try to work the same way and be like men. It didn't work for that generation. It was before me. It was very different. It didn't work. And then there was the second generation, which is more like me, which try to do everything, like try to say, okay, I'm going to do that and that and that. So I'm going to be a great mom. I have 3 kids myself, and I was raising money, raised about $40 million while I was like pregnant and had kids, and try to do it all. And there was some very terrible stories about how our generation handled this, because at the end, you can't win it all, right? You have to give up on something, and sometimes you give up on yourself. So that was my generation. And this generation, your generation, which hopefully will be a much better generation, is the one that actually says, I can't have it all, but I want to be equal. Right? So there are a few things I need to do. If I walk into a room, I want to see as many females investors as there are men investors, because that would mean they would probably understand me more. So the ecosystem kind of needs to change. And in Israel, I have to say, I think we're a few generations back. And unfortunately, we're not there altogether. I have a non-profit organization called Yazamiyot. It's a female founders in Hebrew. That's the Hebrew word for it. And we have over 5,000 female founders there in all different stages of their entrepreneurship. And we did some amazing projects. One is called Campus for Moms, where moms on maternity leave actually come and study 7 sessions on how to start their own startup. And we did a few of those in Israel with Google, and luckily Google expanded this internationally, which was amazing. And so we have 13 around the world, one in London and Korea and other places. And so I think, thanks for pointing this out, because it was very important to me to say, I think we have a long way to go on this. And hopefully this will be corrected in the next few years. Here is a program like yourself already correcting it. And I urge all you female founders to correct this, to make sure you are equal and that you are heard, and that it's okay for you to be moms and entrepreneurs. And that you're not any different. You don't have to do everything exactly like men. You could just do it like yourselves, because everybody's got their own way to do things.
Okay, that's a very powerful and important message. There is also a question of Olivier popping up. You mentioned that the corporates that have already built up large portfolios would spend more time helping their portfolio to survive through these uncertain times during COVID-19. Would you see this as an opportunity for corporate venture capital that are new and with smaller portfolios to step forward at this moment towards investing in new startups?
Yes, I love that attitude, and I think smaller. I think definitely yes. I think we're going to see this. I think people, not only entrepreneurs, invent themselves during COVID-19, but also funds and investors invent themselves, and platforms invent themselves. And perhaps this is something that invents our entire ecosystem altogether. So yes, I think we will definitely see this, and this would be a great opportunity for investors too.
A follow-up question on that. You see a lot of corporates coming to Tel Aviv. It's your home ecosystem, so you might see an evolution there. When corporates come to Tel Aviv, how do they try to connect with? They just acquire, well, not just, but do they acquire startups, or do they tend to keep them in-house, test them, and then invest? Or what are things that you see there?
There is a variety of things. There's a variety of ways. There's some accelerator programs would actually bring them here, like Intel or SAP, would actually bring in the companies, follow them for a while, and then try to invest in them. Only yesterday, Intel announced that they were buying MoveIt, which is an Israeli company. They've been following that company for a while and been involved with the founders for a while. So I think there's a variety of ways. Sometimes they invest in them, sometimes they just follow them or partner with them. I see everything here.
We have a question from Katerina. My understanding is that becoming a mentor within the TechStars program is just as desirable as graduating from the program with a startup. I see that you also have been a mentor for many years. How would you describe the role of a mentor, and what can be expected from a mentor after the graduation of TechStars?
Wow, so we're a really mentor-driven accelerator. So we have really an enormous amount of mentors, both locally and worldwide. And some of the mentors actually stay on a lot after the program. Some of them sit on the advisory board, end up investing in some of the startup companies. But what's expected from mentors is to actually give some kind of a dedication, some time back to the community and to the startup. So it really varies. What we do normally is we have Mentor Madness, which is we introduce them on like a speed dating event where they actually meet each other and can impress each other, because both sides need to want this relationship. And then afterwards, they choose their own lead mentor. And when they choose their mentor, they go on with him for at least the time of the program. And if they want, they go on further.
can close the session here. Hilla, thanks a million for answering all these questions and from better view on the Tel Aviv and also a bit on the New York ecosystem. So thanks so much for doing this, for paying it forward to all these female and male entrepreneurs in our program.
Thank you so much, and good luck to all of you. And just be the entrepreneurs you want to be. You're in a very warm and supporting industry. And I hope to see you in one of the TechStars programs.